And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dogs and cats, elephants and zebras, gypsies and fairies. Sorry, I had to look. I thought the camera stopped. This is my, well, it's really our second Pemmican recipe that we're doing right now. See, what we do is we buy a meat box each month, and that lasts us for the month. Sometimes it even lasts longer than that. Well, there's some meat that we don't use much of. I don't make very good chicken fried steak, so the cube beef or whatever they have different names for it up here than they do in Texas. But I don't make a very good chicken fried steak, so of course if I would make them more often, I'd eventually make them good. But the point isn't chicken fried steak. The point is pemmican. And I don't know what I was saying about pemmican. Anyway, this is the second batch. I was talking about the meat. Well, so what we do is we buy a meat box. Well, like I was saying, some of that meat we just don't use all that much. Like the cube beef, or there's another name for it. There are actually several names for it. Anyway, we just don't use it. It just sits in the freezer for a few months. So I decided not to use all of it because we had extra, because we had last month's left. The thing is, it may not be the tenderest meat, but at least the way you get it up here is pretty tender. It's interesting how tender it is up here versus what, it's like up here you can't get skirt steak. They don't know what it is. Well, that's what you make fajitas with. But you have to buy a better cut of meat actually up here. Well, you can use any kind of meat, really, any kind of beef. Actually, you can make fajitas out of chicken and pork and shrimp and fish. But anyway, so I just threw it in the oven. It has 8 hours to cook, 7 hours, 54 minutes left. 7 hours, 54 minutes. I'm thinking, I won't know until I actually get down to that point. I may just use this. Thunder fat. Buffalo tallow. Made from buffalo fat. For my daughter in Teos in Texas, sorry about the dirty fingernails. One reason I am telling you about this, and I'm not using your name, of course. The other person, my sister, who's not necessarily my biological sister, but she's my sister, in Indiana, you know who you are. Again, I'm not using names. Indiana, I think I got that right. One reason I would recommend you making some pemmican. First of all, it's probably not going to go bad in your lifetime or mine. Actually, it would probably go bad in your lifetime before it would go bad in my lifetime. The thing is, sometimes they find 100, 200-year-old bags of pemmican. They dig it up and it's still edible. I'm not sure I'd want to try it. Well, then they found cheese in Ireland, in the bogs, that like 1,000 years old, and it's still edible. Very strong, I would imagine, but it's still edible. 1,000-year-old cheese. Maybe older than that. It doesn't look much like cheese, just looks like a hunk of something. But anyway, so even if you don't have refrigeration, pemmican will keep. I do keep our pemmican in the freezer just as an extra precaution because it does have meat in it, but you don't have to. Now this is beef tallow. And this is buffalo. Since I'm not making a big batch, I may use the buffalo, which is what it was originally made out of. At least that's my understanding. And look at this. the buffalo tallow is $1 cheaper than the beef tallow. The jar is a little more than half the size large, or one's about half the size, not quite half the size, 2/3 the size, but you're paying the same amount, or almost $1 less, I believe. So this is your better deal. Now you can get this from Townsend, or Townsend's, formerly James Townsend and Son, but you're going to pay another $15. Why spend another $15 for this? I mean, really. I like their products. I have purchased from them and will continue to purchase from them. But again, why pay whatever it is that they have on their site for this when you can get it for maybe $15 cheaper from Fatworks themselves? But yeah, it's not going to go bad on you. If you do it right, it's not going to go bad on you. Now the meat in the oven, this is a basic recipe. I'll share a link. Take beef, buffalo, deer, moose, whatever. You take the leanest meat. You want the least amount of fat. You slice it into thin slices or into small chunks, however you want to do it. That oven is set at 180 for 8 hours. There are 2 trays of meat, of beef, and I'm not going to add any more beef to it because we need the meat. I mean, if it ever came down to it, we'd eat the pemmican too. You think of pemmican as a power bar. Okay, I mean, now my daughter, making pemmican in your neck of the woods where it's hotter than it is here and hotter than it is in Indiana, it's, how do you say, you're not going to need to freeze it or refrigerate it, but I think it's a good idea to do it anyway because, like I said, it does have meat. As a binding agent, you can add honey, which I did to the first batch. I'll do to the second batch as well. The second batch, I'm probably not going to add nuts. Instead, I'm going to add berries. I think we got a bag of frozen blueberries, and I'm going to use some of those, but they don't... I'm not going to start working on those until closer to time to take the meat and grind it up. Once the meat is really, really dry and brittle, you take it out and you throw it in your blender, in your food processor, whatever. Personally, I would, once I've done that, I would probably put it back in the oven for 2 or 3 or 4 hours, depending on how dry it is and things. That you don't want to burn it. Of course, cooking it on such a low temperature would be kind of hard to burn. You could put the oven up to 200, but I wouldn't do that. The amount of meat that I'm going to have is probably going to be about half a cup. So I won't be using the whole thing of this. Because like I said, this buffalo tallow is more expensive. Well, actually, it is more expensive. You're paying, I think, $1 less for this jar than you are for the beef. But you get almost twice as much with the beef. And I'd have to look the price up to share with you. But I'll see if I can provide a link to Fatworks. What I would suggest to the 2 people I'm referring to, is one of you, actually both of you could probably do it outside. I don't know what my daughter has in the way of what she can do outdoors. What you could do is I would start certain things before going to buy the meat. If you're going to do it out of doors, I would get the meat and cut it really, really thin. What you can do is you can freeze it for a little while and then take it out and cut it, or you can freeze it and then let it thaw for about 10 to 15 minutes and then cut it. or throw it in the microwave for 30 seconds to a minute and then cut it. You don't, if you let it thaw a little bit, it's a little easier to cut. Otherwise, it's like cutting ice, which is hard to do. Cut your meat, really, really thin, and then build a framework of wood, of poles, of branches and limbs and twigs. Maybe 3, 4, 5-sided. Put cross sections in there, 1 for support and 2 to hang the meat on. Make a fire, a warm fire, not too hot. You might even smoke the meat some. And one way you do that is just use a mixture of dry wood and wet wood, or green wood and dry wood, brown wood, dry wood, whatever you want to call it. And if you really want to smoke it, put a tarp of some sort over it, and make sure there's plenty of ventilation at the top, and the smoke and the heat will just stay in there and help to really flavor the meat. The smoke will flavor the meat. And then we do have a molcajete, but it's made out of granite. You don't want a granite molcajete. It's like a grinding stone. We also have a mortar and pestle. It's right over there on the kitchen counter. You could use that. You could put it into a tin cup and mash it up with a stick. If you get a little wood in there, it's not going to hurt you. Might get a splinter in your mouth, but that's, Anyway, I know I need to trim my mustache, but anyway, after you do that, and there's a formula for X amount of fat to X amount of meat to whatever. Now, we don't have any nuts, and we don't have any money to buy nuts, so I'm going to use berries this time, probably the blueberries. What I'm going to do is, once the meat is done or about done, I'm going to take some of the blueberries out. I'm going to spread a few of them out on the pan. Let them dry out, a little dry heat in the oven. If you want, you can crack the oven to keep some of the moisture out, or open it up now and then to let moisture out. Don't use pork, don't use chicken, use beef, moose, deer, game animals, although I wouldn't consider cattle a game animal, but you know what I'm talking about. And you're going to have to melt the tallow. You just put that into a frying pan or a skillet or a pan, and just heat it till it liquefies, and then you mix the meat in there with the nuts and or the berries, if you're going to use nuts, if you're going to use berries. So my first 3 batches of pemmican will be different. Each one will be different. I said in one or more other videos I want to add pecans and pistachios to a batch, because those are two of the most nutritious nuts you can find. Plus, having the nuts gives that extra texture, extra flavor. But you want to grind the nuts up. You want everything you want ground up. You might want to leave a few nuts for extra texture, maybe a few berries for extra texture that are not completely ground up but are chopped up pretty small. I would suggest doing those things, but the beef tallow is more or less an experiment, because I have made pemmican before, but it's been with the beef tallow. So, is it a little blurry? Anyway, so the thing is, the buffalo tallow is so expensive that it's not going to be used much. Though I'm wondering, it does have a different aroma. It probably has a different flavor, but I would think relatively mild. Oh. So, yeah, I've read you can make pemmican out of dry fish. I don't know about that. Maybe, maybe not. I'd have to find dry fish. I did find a source for old-fashioned salt-cured bacon, and they have other things as well, and they have reasonable prices. So I may be getting something from them eventually. But the sausage isn't for this. The sausage would be or the bacon would be to take with me, and take a little bit with me, fry some up for dinner, fry some up for breakfast. But this is salt cured bacon, so you have to let it soak. The one website says 45 minutes. My mother and uncle grew up on salt pork, and from what my mother told me, it's best to change the water out a few times, because the water will become saturated with the salt. You pour that out, you're getting rid of some of the salt, pour some fresh water in there, and you just do that over a few times. And I'd probably do it more than 45 minutes too, unless you're starving to death. But those are good things to have. Salt pork, dry sausage, pemmican. These are good things to have in a survival situation, an emergency situation. And let me just say something about that. The United States, from New York City to South Carolina to Oregon, Washington, California, even Texas, Tennessee, Kentucky, they have earthquakes. They have had them, and they will have them. Hurricanes, tornadoes, epidemics, war. It's not a matter of when, it's not a matter of if, but it is a matter of when something will happen. Remember, disasters are not planned. Disasters happen. It's rescue and rehab that are planned. But you never know quite what's going to happen or how bad it's going to be until it happens. We get hurricanes up here in New England. People don't realize that. We had a road over in Vermont. This is a major road. It was shut down for a whole year after a hurricane. You could not get from one side of the state to the other from the south, from southern Vermont. And I know I don't sound like a Yankee, but I am now. Can't believe I just said that, because you know how we hated Yankees down in Texas? We hate them with a passion. Now I am one. Anyway, then my girlfriend, she's a southerner too. So my daughter's a southerner. Actually, my sister's a southerner. My other sister's a southerner. It's just one of them doesn't live in the South. But anyway, yeah, we get hurricanes up here. And then you have the various epidemics that have occurred. You have natural disasters, man-made disasters. You have dams that break. We tend to forget these after a few months or a few years. I remember what they call it, the North Grove earthquake, Oak Grove earthquake. Anyway, it happened in California, and I was living in San Antonio de Tejas at the time. And I knew somebody who was out there. It took me about a week to get in touch with that person, and I was worried. She and some of her school friends got in a car and drove south to somebody's beach house, and they were safe there. Northridge earthquake, maybe that's what it was called. But anyway, so you never know what's going to happen, but you know it is going to happen. Something is going to happen. So be prepared.